episode is The Pope's Migrant Invasion. So, I wanted to say before I get too far in here, welcome to everybody who's watching on the live stream version of this. I'm live streaming on Twitter and on DLive as well as on YouTube this week. So, welcome to any and all who are listening that way. Well, here I am, and once again, it's 12:30 on a Sunday morning, and I'm finally just getting around to doing the Saturday live stream podcast. I know it's my weekly struggle with getting things done in a timely fashion, and this week, oddly enough, I didn't have anything specific I had to do today. It's one of the few Saturdays I didn't have anything scheduled, and no scheduled projects or things like this. So I used the day to get some stuff done that I haven't gotten done for a while. Got some cleaning done, which was nice. Got a few technical things taken care of on my computer and with my tablet and some things of that sort. So it was a productive day, but it's funny. You can sit here and you can have an entire day free, and you think you're going to get all of this stuff done. And at least in my case, I find I only get, I don't know, I get maybe 50% done of what I'd hoped to get done. It's amazing how the time flies. It really is. And I'm always like that on vacation too. I schedule, I get a vacation. I'm going to get all this stuff done, and I never get as much done as I plan on. I do get things done. It's not that I don't get things done, but it seems like I'm always wildly optimistic on how much I'm going to get done. Well, anyway, and then there's the other thing here with me too, and I've been this way my entire life. I think I've got a touch of ADD. Kind of like that movie. Was it that movie a few years ago? Up. And the dog. He's like squirrel. Yeah, squirrel. Yeah, and I'm a bit like that. ADD. What's that? Attention deficit disorder. Yeah, I remember as a kid when I was growing up. Sometimes we would have these projects we'd have to do when I was in school. You had to do a research project or something. And this goes back to when I was, maybe in 5th, 6th grade, this kind of thing. And I remember we had to go down to the school library and you'd have to do some research. And, you typically start with an encyclopedia or some kind of a general reference book like this. This is way back in the day. Okay, there wasn't any internet here. We're talking in the late 70s. The internet was simply kind of a thing in the future. I remember reading as a kid when I was maybe in about 5th or 6th grade. I remember reading this thing, and this is again in the late 70s, and it said, "Oh, one day everybody will have a computer, and you'll be able to go on the computer, and you'll be able to go shopping and get library books." And I thought, "Oh, well, that's a bunch of hooey. That's never going to happen." And of course, they were talking about the internet, and which had been invented in the late 60s, and it was around, but it was in sort of very highly specialized. I think the military had some use of it, some things like this, but it wasn't something that was widely available to the general public at that time. And it would be, until I think about 1995 or so is typically the year when they say the internet got started. So we didn't have an internet back in the day. You just had books. I know, very, very, very old school. Kind of a thing. And I remember I always had this problem when I would go and start doing research. I'd maybe crack open an encyclopedia or something, and I'd start trying to find the article, or maybe an article that was on the topic I was looking for. And I'd always get distracted by these other things. I'd say, "Oh, this looks really interesting." I'd start reading about this, or "This looks really interesting." I'd start reading about this, and then I'm, off on some tangent that I completely forgot what it was. I was actually there, and what I was supposed to be doing. I did everything. I think I read everything but the stuff I was supposed to read. And I've always been a little bit like that. And I know this evening I kind of got drawn into watching a couple of videos. I got sucked in. I found this video channel. It's a YouTube channel with this one fellow. He does videos talking about the Titanic and some different aspects of the sinking of the Titanic. And I've always been fascinated by that. And he does them very well. I mean, they're very, very interesting sorts of videos. And I kind of got sucked into binge watching that. And then I got, there was a video, it was about an hour long video. It was on the, a B-17 called the Memphis Belle. And, there was a movie made on that, about that. I don't know. It's been 15 or 20 years now, or longer than that. I don't know. It's been a while. But it was a B-17 bomber in World War II Europe, and a pretty famous plane. But I guess it had deteriorated the condition of it had, and they packed this thing all up and they shipped it up to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, which isn't too far from where I live. And I didn't know this. And they restored this thing. It took them 12 years to do it, and they I think it's on display at the Air Force Museum up there. It's been a long time since I've been to the Air Force Museum, but it was very interesting. It was kind of a combination. They talked about some of the missions the plane flew. They'd cut to that, and they'd have they'd talk about some of the things the crew members went through, and then of course, then they cut to the current day where they're doing the restoration on the airplane. It was all very interesting, very well done. Kind of very fascinating to look through this. But I'm kind of a sucker. I've always been kind of a World War II buff. That's another thing I remember from back when I was a kid. I was always kind of a World War II buff. So when I saw that, and I kind of started watching, I thought, oh, I'll just watch a few minutes of it. And then, like half an hour later, I'm sucked into it and I can't stop. So anyway, those are my excuses for why I'm late here this week. So anyway, let's get on to today's topic here. I had mentioned, I call the title of this, the Pope's Migrant Invasion. And it's been a few years since I've really done a lot with immigration. I know that I had talked some about immigration quite a bit. I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. I know I wrote quite a bit about that on my blog. But the last year or two, I haven't written as much about it, and I haven't really done much in the way of podcasts on the topic either. But this is becoming a bigger issue all of a sudden. The policies of the Biden administration, maybe the Biden regime, I don't know, maybe that's a better word for it, but whatever you want to call the current government of the United States, they have really unleashed a flood. And the policies that they have unleashed with or enacted, whatever you want to call it, with immigration, are causing and are going to cause in the fairly near future, I think, some very significant problems politically and economically. Some of this could really backfire on the Democrats. And I think that in some of the reading I was even doing today on this, there were some congressional Democrats that they're a little bit concerned about what's happening, because I think with people are going to start seeing, and right now we're just seeing the leading edge of this massive influx of migrants and immigrants and refugees, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. I mean, we're in a country right now where you have massive unemployment, depression era levels of unemployment, depending on who you talk to. But there's massive unemployment. Just this past week, there are over 800,000 initial jobless claims. That is a disaster, and it's been consistently like that now for really the better part of a year. Massive unemployment, massive business closures. I mean, this isn't just like things where businesses are a little bit slow. I mean, there are massive destruction of the economy of the United States of America that's brought about not, as the headlines say, by COVID. COVID did not shut a single business down in this country. It's the overreaction of the government that has shut businesses down. And I'd like to blame it all on the Democrats. I mean, I'm a Republican, so I'd like to say, oh, it's all the Democrats' fault. But it's not all the Democrats' fault. The Republicans have had a hand in that as well. I think the Democrats have been worse on the issue. I'll say that. But the Republicans have not been very good, by and large, on the issue either. So, I mean, there's plenty of blame to go around on this. But when you've got an economy that's in serious trouble, and then you're importing millions of people, or legalizing millions of people the way the Biden people want to do, it's not a good combination, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how this goes here over the next few months. And Lord willing, I intend to follow this story pretty closely. But this past week, the Biden administration, they released or they introduced something called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. CNN describes it as a sweeping immigration bill. And in my opinion, there are two basic objectives to this bill, at least two. Now, there may be more than that, but there's at least two. One of those is to import a constituency for the Democrats. I mean, that's what they want to do. They want to import all of these people, and these people they expect will reliably vote Democrat, and they probably will. So, I mean, there's that. So they're importing a constituency. It's kind of like dissolving the people and electing a new one, as someone once said. I think there was an immigration writer was I think it was Bertolt Brecht. I think he was a German writer, and of course that was a play on the what's that? I think it's in the Declaration of Independence, where it talks about the people have a right to dissolve a government and elect a new one, and he was talking about the government dissolving the people and electing a new one, and I think that's a bit of what's the attempt is on the part of, in particular, the Democrats, but really just I think the establishment in general. I think they seem to have a disdain for Americans, and I guess they want they think somehow they can do better with importing people, and that they're cast the votes that Americans won't cast themselves. Certainly, that seems to be the strategy of the Democrats. So there's that. I mean, they want to import an overwhelming Democratic constituency. And the second thing, too, is I think that this bill certainly aligns the federal government's immigration policy with that of the Vatican. And this is one of the things that has been a tremendous frustration to me, is that it's just obvious that one of the biggest, and maybe actually, I think you could probably make the argument that the single biggest promoter of mass taxpayer subsidized immigration, migration, and refugee resettlement is the Vatican. This is policy of the Vatican. And they make no bones about it. I mean, they practically scream it from the rooftops, and yet almost nobody notices. And not only does nobody in the mainstream media seem to notice this, but even people in the alternate media. I'm talking, when I talk about alternate media, I'm talking about people like me, people who, do live streams on Twitter and DLive, and people who, make podcasts, and people who write blogs. Very few people point out the very obvious 500-pound gorilla in the room, and that is the Pope's very aggressive use of immigration. And we're going to talk a little bit about why the Pope does this. I mean, it really ties back into the economic and political philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church. I've talked some about that. I've gone through, made some YouTube videos. I need to get back to doing this, by the way, but I'm making some YouTube videos of based on John Robbins' book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania. And he talks about the collectivism of the Roman Church state. That is that the Roman Church state believes in collectivist economics. The basic philosophy of the Roman Church state economic philosophy is fascist. That's if we want to be specific about it. Now, I don't want to get into specifics on that right now, but essentially, the Roman Catholic Church is fascist in their stance on economics, and they're globalists in terms of their politics. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church is the single biggest promoter of globalism, of world government. And again, this is not something that's a matter of speculation. You can find this in document after document after document, whether you're talking about things that the popes have said or other very high officials in the Roman Catholic Church. They constantly promote globalism. They constantly promote one world government. And they're very clear about this. I mean, there should be there's not even any debate about it. And that includes this Pope. Pope Francis, we're talking about. He's a big promoter of world government, and of course, mass immigration, mass migration is not only is it a consequence of the economics and politics of Rome, but it also it's one of the tools that they use to further those things. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the presentation here tonight. So let's take a look at a few things regarding the Pope and immigration. Now, there was one story that really caught my eye here this past week. Just a moment, I'm going to get a little drink here. Got my hot apple cider. I think I mentioned that last week. Boy, I love that stuff. That's a little Keurig thing that you can make, and that's just the best. Anyway, but there's a story that I saw here this past week. It's a headline. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes, but this is from a TV station in El Paso, Texas. And the headline reads, Pope calls on faithful to help migrants achieve new life. Francis sends letter to Juarez Catholic Diocese reflecting on his 2016 visit. And just kind of reading through a little bit of this here. It says Pope Francis has sent a letter to the Bishop of Juarez, reminiscing about his trip to that Mexican border city 5 years ago. I keep alive the memory of my visit to your border city and the celebration of the Eucharist, Francis said in his letter to Juarez Bishop Jose Guadalupe Torres Campos. Now, I had the opportunity to visit El Paso, visit some of the brethren in El Paso, and I got to see Ryan Denton. In fact, I just interviewed Ryan and posted that interview earlier this week. Ryan is the open air preacher, and in fact, the title of that episode, it's episode 48. Radio Lux Lucet, episode 48. It's titled "Interview with Ryan Denton, Open Air Preacher." And I'd encourage you to listen to it. It was a great interview. It was really great to catch up with Ryan and hear his comments. And it was a great interview. What I learned is that big metro area, but El Paso is on the American side, and Juarez is on the Mexican side. And Juarez is a big city. I think, gosh, I'm trying to think now. I want to say maybe it might be up to 2 million people. I remember at night when you'd stand out and you would look south from El Paso, that you could see all the lights of Juarez, and they just seemed like they just extended all out as far as the eye could see, almost to the horizon. I don't know if they quite did that, but it's a big city. It's not just a little town. I mean, it's a substantial city. Juarez is. And the Pope back in February 2016, he went out and he held mass and he talked and he really pushed the whole migrant immigration thing at that time. And so now he's reminiscing about this in this letter. And the let's see here. The Pope, and this is something that he said here in the letter that he just wrote this year, looking back 5 years. But he said he's talking about the migrants, I take it, or our brothers and sisters have gone on the road in search of hope and a new life that we cannot take away from them, but instead work with them to achieve it. Now, one of the things that's interesting here is the Pope. And you hear Roman Catholic officials say this kind of thing, whether you're talking about the Pope or cardinals or maybe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, they're always right in this plural first person. We cannot afford to do this. We can't, or we need to do this, or we must do this, or we're obligated to do such and such a thing. But they never quite specify who the we is. And so Francis here, he's talking about the we, but he never really states who he's talking about. But you kind of get the context of it. He means the American people who are expected to pay the freight for the migrants by having their taxes extracted from them, and at the same time they have no say in the matter. We must do this. We are obligated to do this, is essentially what the Pope is saying. And if you as the American people don't want to have your country run over by massive migrant caravans from Honduras or wherever, well, that's just too bad. Your job is to be quiet and to fork over the money and to take your beating because you deserve it, because these other people need to have food, clothing, and shelter, and you have an obligation to provide it to them. Now, all of that need and obligation, that goes back to an economic idea of Rome. It's called the universal destination of goods. And the universal destination of goods, I don't want to get too much into that into detail right now, but if you want to have maybe just a general inkling about what it means, is the universal destination of goods says that need is the sole criterion for possession. So, it doesn't matter whether you own something, whether you constructed it, whether you purchased it, however you came across that property, if you don't need it, if you supposedly have, property in excess of what you need and somebody else needs it, well, then you are obligated to give it to them. And if you won't do it yourself, well, then the church is going to make sure that the government takes your property and gives it to somebody else. This is, so that's kind of the theory and practice of the universal destination of goods. And again, John Robbins talks about this in some very fine detail in his book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania. If you don't have that book, I'd strongly encourage you to get it. It is the best book, period, on the economic and political thought of Rome. And you will not understand the the Pope's theory and practice of immigration until you read that book. Or I should say this: maybe you can understand it, but you will understand it much better having read John Robbins' Ecclesiastical Megalomania than if you just try to figure things out as you read through various statements by Vatican officials or church officials. Moving on here, let's see. Oh, it's worth mentioning too. This is kind of interesting. The Pope is reminiscing, talking about Auld Lang Syne here. He's reminiscing about his February 2016 trip to Juarez. Well, it was in that February 16th trip to Juarez, and it was the aftermath of this. When he was on the jet flying home, he was having this press conference, and during that time, the Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, I guess doing business as Francis the First. Bergoglio, he said, quote, "A person who thinks only about building a wall wherever they may be and not building bridges is not Christian." Now, you have to understand kind of the context in which he said that. Remember, this is February of 2016. It was in the last presidential election cycle. Okay. And who was running for president in 2016? Donald Trump. And what was Donald Trump talking about in 2016? He was talking about building a wall, build that wall. I mean, that was one of the key components of his 2016 presidential run. And very clearly, the Pope was taking a shot at Trump. Now, Francis didn't mention Donald Trump by name, but it's pretty obvious from the context and from his words who he was talking about. And it was interesting because Donald Trump shot back at the Pope, and he called his comments disgraceful and said some other things. And I remember just being absolutely amazed at Donald Trump at that time. And I have to tell you, I wasn't a huge Donald Trump was not my first pick going into 2016. Rand Paul was actually the guy that I was hoping that would carry the nomination, but Rand Paul seemed like he was more interested in not being his father, Ron Paul, than he was in trying to build on his father's legacy. I think Rand Paul did not run a good campaign in 2016. I was actually disappointed by it. Now, I think Rand Paul is a fine senator, and I appreciate a lot of his stances, but he did not run a good presidential campaign in 2016, and he really never caught on with the voters. I mean, he was always in the 1 or 2%. Whenever they would do the polls, he never really got anywhere close to the top. Were ever really seriously challenged for the nomination in 2016. But Donald Trump went out. Bam! I remember that in the summer of 2015 when he announced his candidacy, and he shot right to the top of the polls, and he never relinquished that. And one of the reasons why is because he spoke to concerns that Americans had, legitimate concerns about the immigration policies of this country. And, even though he didn't get done everything that he said he was going to get done, he did have some very nice wins on immigration during his 4 years in office. But that was actually when I really started to get interested in Donald Trump, because he shot back at the Pope. And I'm thinking, I have never in all of my life ever heard of a politician of national status, at any rate, ever fire back at the Pope. Nobody does that. I mean, that's like tugging on Superman's cape. There's that old song, you don't tug on Superman's cape. You don't spit in the wind. You don't do something else, something or something, and you don't mess around with Jim. I think, is that an old Jim Croce song? I don't know, something like that. But you just don't do that if you're an American politician. But Donald Trump did. He went there. And I was blown away by that. And I thought, maybe this is somebody that I could get behind. And that's when I really started to actually get interested in Donald Trump as a candidate, when he fired back at the Pope. Now, going on with this, the whole thing with the Pope, and not just the Pope, but the whole organization, the whole Roman church state, and their support, their treasonous support, really, of of mass immigration. Another entity within Rome, and this is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB. They really are immigration traitors. I mean, what they advertise or what they advocate is immigration treason. It is destructive of the United States of America. It furthers the interest of Rome, but it is destructive of the United States of America. And this is something, and they do this constantly, and nobody or hardly anybody ever points out their treason. And one of the best ways to get a sense of the intensely treasonous immigration position of the USCCB is just to read their press releases. You can just go out the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They've got a website out there, and you can go to the news, the press release area, and they put out press releases usually a few times a week. And I would say generally you're find anywhere from you'll find at least every month at least one immigration based press release, and typically more than that. You might get about one a week. So you might say on average, I don't know, anywhere from 1 to 4 immigration related press releases per month. And I can tell you, after having looked at these for several years, and I've saved, I don't know, a lot of these going back several years, I have yet to find one single press release from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops where they ever took the side of the American people. Now, of course, again, if you know something about Rome, you would expect that because, of course, Rome has always hated the United States of America. It's a large, successful, historically at any rate, Protestant nation. And it's an embarrassment to them. It's an affront to them, philosophically. And they very much have sought to bring the United States down. They took the side of the Confederacy during the Civil War. Divide and conquer. And of course, the philosophy of Rome supports slavery. So that's another reason why I'm sure that they took the stance they did during the Civil War. But the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is a treasonous organization, and their treason is obvious in so many areas, and it shows up very clearly in the area of immigration. And there are just a few press releases that they've put out just in the times that Joe Biden has been president. And you can just read through the titles on these things and you can see what I'm talking about. Here's one. This is back on January 21st. Now remember, Biden was inaugurated on January 20th. So it was the very next day. The USCCB Migration Chairman welcomes the administration's initial effort to reform enforcement and protect families. And of course, what this really means when they talk about reform enforcement and protecting families, is they mean loosing a flood of immigrants, migrants, and refugees on the American people, which the American people are going to have to support through their taxes and all of the massive welfare programs that go along with this. There's a second release, and this was also done the very same day, January the 22nd, 2021. USCCB chairman welcomed the end of ban prohibiting immigrants and refugees from certain Muslim majority and African countries entering the United States. Of course, the fact that ban prohibited immigrants and refugees from certain Muslim majority and African countries from entering the United States, the fact that those countries also had a high level of terrorism in them, that doesn't matter to the bishop. So, if people come over here and, engage in violent activity, well, that's just the price that the American people have to pay. In the eyes of the USCCB, there was one, just to give you a sense of this, there was one guy that was brought over from Somalia. This was back in 2014. He was brought over by Catholic Charities. So the government actually paid Catholic Charities, which is one of the refugee resettlement organizations. They make a lot of money off the United States government. So they bring this guy in from Somalia. He initially was in Dallas for a few months. Then he went to Columbus, Ohio, where there's a Somali community. And he enrolled at Ohio State. And then, I don't know, one day he decided to go jihad, and he rammed his car into a crowd of people and got out and started slashing away with a machete. And he was shot and killed by the Ohio State Police Department. Yeah, so he didn't kill anybody, this would-be terrorist. But this was a guy from Somalia, which is one of the countries where there was a ban on refugees by the Trump administration. But I guess the Roman Catholic Church wants to bring more people like that, and they're fine if they destroy American lives. I mean, that's I guess just the price in their opinion that needs to be paid for us to fill our so-called obligation. Well, which I don't think that there is one, but Rome does. Here's the third example. This is also a press release from the USCCB on January 21st, 2021. USCCB President and Migration Chairman welcomed administration's commitment to DACA and the call for legislation on immigration reform. So, again, this is a call to flood the country with immigrants, migrants, and refugees, and also reward people who've broken the American immigration law. That is what's going to happen. With this, and of course, just this week, as I had mentioned, the Biden administration, or the Biden regime, maybe we should call it, they have announced this thing called the what they call it, the something or another. Yes, the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, and so that's going to encompass all of this stuff that the bishops are so excited about. Now. One thing that I think is worth noting here, I've mentioned some of this, some of the immigration skullduggery of the Roman Catholic officials, and I mentioned the fact that you very rarely ever see anything in the press, either the mainstream press or the alternate press, criticizing Rome properly for this. But every now and then you do see something, and this is an article I've quoted before, but it's such a good quote. I think I'm going to go ahead and use it again here. Here's what this is from the Washington Post from September 7th, 2017. And the headline, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and show that headline here. Let's see here. Get this on here. Okay, here we go. Bannon, Catholic Church needs illegal aliens to fill the churches. And it starts off here. Stephen K. Bannon, President Trump's former chief strategist, lashed out at leaders of the Catholic Church in the United States who condemned the president's recent decision to phase out Obama-era program that has allowed nearly 800,000 undocumented immigrants who were brought to the country as children to gain temporary legal status. He's talking here about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. That's what DACA, that's DACA. That's what that stands for. And of course, Joe Biden wants to reward the DACA recipients, but we'll stay on topic here. We won't get too far afield. But Bannon went on to say this. He said, oh yeah, here it is. I'm going to read the quote here. This is a quote from Steve Bannon. Unable to really come to grips with the problems in the church, they need illegal aliens. They need illegal aliens to fill the churches. End quote. Bannon said in an interview with Charlie Rose that will air on 60 Minutes on CBS on Sunday. It's obvious on the face of it, said Bannon. And Bannon added, they have an economic interest. They have an economic interest in unlimited immigration, unlimited illegal immigration. And then the interviewer cut Bannon off and said, that's a tough thing to say about your church. That was Charlie Rose. To which Bannon responded, quote, as much as I respect Cardinal Dolan, that's Timothy Dolan, and the bishops on doctrine, this is not doctrine, Bannon responded. This is not doctrine at all. I totally respect the Pope, and I totally respect the Catholic bishops and cardinals on doctrine. This is not about doctrine. This is about the sovereignty of a nation. And in that regard, they're just another guy with an opinion, end quote. Well, I think Stephen Bannon is I don't know whether he's just being politic here and doesn't want to get in trouble with the bishops, or maybe he really believes that. I don't know, but the what the cardinal and the Pope and the bishops say about immigration is doctrine. It's you can't say on the one hand that the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth, and then say, well, when he talks about doctrine, I believe him, but if he talks about immigration, he's just some other guy with an opinion. No, that's not how the Roman Catholic Church treats the papal pronouncements. Now they put up with that to some degree because I think it's in Rome's advantage to do so. But if Rome is ever in a position to enforce these kinds of statements, believe me, they're going to make sure that they're going to make sure that people understand when the Pope talks about immigration, he's talking about doctrine. There's not, they try to make this separation, but there really isn't any. So I would disagree with Bannon there, but I think he's quite right to summarize Rome's Rome's position here on immigration. They have an interest in doing so. They have an economic interest. They want to fill the churches. That's certainly one of the reasons why they take the stance they do on immigration. Now, I want to give another quote here from Steve Bannon. This quote is a little bit later. It's about 9 months later. This is from an article in Newsmax, and it's dated June 17th, 2018. And here's the headline: is Bannon, Catholic Church, one of the worst instigators of open borders policy. Now, he's absolutely right about that. And let's read here what Steve Bannon has to say here. There's quite a good quote in here. Here we go. Down toward the bottom, he says this is Steve Bannon. The Pope, more than anybody else, has driven the migrant crisis in Europe, declared Bannon, who is Catholic. The Catholic Church, I have gone after New York Archbishop Cardinal Timothy Dolan. The Catholic Church is one of the worst instigators of this open borders policy, end quote. And again, Bannon is absolutely right. There's no question about that. They are one of the worst instigators of the open borders policy, maybe the worst, in fact. And again, this is coming from somebody, from Steve Bannon, who is himself a Roman Catholic. But, some of the best critics of the Roman Catholic Church are themselves Roman Catholic. You think a little bit about Lord Acton in the 19th century. He wrote some just devastating critiques of the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, he was even hired by a Presbyterian publication to write some pieces on, against Rome. And Lord Acton, John Emmerich Edward Dalbert Acton, he's usually known as just Lord Acton. His father was English, his mother was German Catholic, and he followed his mother in terms of religion. He was a lifelong member of the Roman Church state. But he was also one of the fiercest critics in the 19th century of the Roman Catholic Church. And you see some of the same kind of thing here from Steve Bannon. Here's another critic of Rome. In fact, I'm going to hold this up here to the camera. This is actually from a book. It's called, let's see if I can get that in here, get that in the frame a little bit better. There we go. So it's called Open Borders Inc. And this is a book by Michelle Malkin, who's a pretty well-known columnist, conservative American columnist. Michelle Malkin is a Roman Catholic as well, but in her book, she has quite a bit in her book about criticisms of the Roman Catholic Church and their promotion of mass taxpayer-funded immigration. Let me just read a paragraph here to you. This is from her book, Open Borders, Inc. This is page 86. So this is Michelle Malkin here. Quote, I was raised Catholic, but the words of the current Pope and past popes on America's immigration policy are not gospel. Pope Francis has issued apostolic exhortations citing the Old Testament to justify open borders, such as Exodus 22:21. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. Yet he ignores a multitude of biblical examples of leaders from King Asa to Nehemiah to David, who built walls to protect their lands and people, with the Lord's approval or at his specific behest. Pope Francis further counsels every other sovereign nation to implement a program of open-ended hospitality for welcoming the stranger in the spirit of St. Benedict. To date, however, the pontiff has not instituted such a policy in his own nation state and thrown open the gates of Vatican City to any and all strangers seeking refuge. Even worse, His Eminence takes a far more radical position of not only demanding that we admit every asylee, refugee, claimant without question, but also that every economic migrant be allowed onto our soil. The only proper attitude for a Christian toward illegal aliens, he proselytizes, is to stand in the shoes of those brothers and sisters of ours who risk their lives to offer a future to their children. Well, here's the thing with the Pope. I mean, when he gets out here and he starts preaching, that was a good paragraph. And Michelle Malkin, again, is Roman Catholic. I mean, as she stated there. But one of the things, anytime we get into a discussion of immigration, especially when you're hearing from people like the Pope, they're always constantly talking about all these things that are rightfully belongs to the immigrants, all these hopes and dreams and what have you about them. Well, here's the funny thing. What about the hopes and dreams of the American people? You know, whenever the Pope or any official from the Roman Catholic Church talks about immigration, the the one group of people in the entire world who don't matter are the people of the United States or the people of any other country that they want to flood with migrants. Steve Bannon talked about the stance of the Pope on the European migrant crisis over the last few years. And the Pope has constantly been out there flacking more migrants, more migrants, more migrants, without even carrying the slightest whit what it does to the people of the nations that he wants to send the migrants to. And of course, he himself, the Vatican City, doesn't take any migrants in. He reminds me, he's just like the Pharisees in Jesus' day. Jesus talked about the Pharisees and how they would tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's backs, but they themselves wouldn't lift so much as a finger to move them. Well, that's the Pope. The Pope is and he's a phony, just like the Pharisees were phonies. But he likes to posit and primp and preen before the cameras about what a great humanitarian is. But he himself doesn't want to lift a finger to suffer the lifting the burden for any of this stuff. He wants you and me to do it. He wants to sit up there and make all these great, grand humanitarian pronouncements, but as far as actually paying for it and suffering the consequences of it, no, it's not going to come anywhere close to him. He's not going to lift a finger to bear that burden. Now, we talked some there about about a couple of Roman Catholic witnesses criticizing the church. I wanted to close today with talking about immigration. I wanted to close by talking about a Protestant witness on this subject, and the writer of this particular article I'm going to discuss, and I think you have it up there on the screen. This is an article, and I think you could this might be the best single article that I've read by a Christian on the subject of immigration. And the title of it's called "Romanizing America Through Illegal Immigration" by Pastor Ralph Ovedall. Now, I know he used to have a program. I first got familiar with him when I was listening to, he was on Sermon Audio. And I remember there was a gentleman, a fellow that in fact, I interviewed him a year or two back, and I probably need to get him back on the program again. His name's Alan Wall. But he is a Protestant. I believe he's a Baptist, and he's one of the very few evangelicals out there who gets it on immigration, who really does understand that what's being done to our country and these immigration policies that are being promoted by people like Joe Biden or the Pope or George Soros or these other people, that these are not Christian immigration policies, but these are destructive of our nation, they're destructive of the American people, and this stuff needs to be spoken against, and it needs to be stopped politically. And as Christians, we have an obligation to speak out against these things. And Ralph Ovedall is, unlike most evangelicals today, Ralph Ovedall is not deceived by what the Church of Rome is. He understands that it's the Babylon. He understands who Antichrist is. He understands that the office of the papacy is the office of Antichrist. He gets this stuff. And not too many Protestants in our own day do get that. But he does, and I really appreciate the work that he does here. His article is really specifically focused on critiquing a document that was put out by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. It was called, it was back in 2006. It was called, Strangers No Longer, Together on the Journey of Hope, a Pastoral Letter Concerning Migration. Now, I've written blog pieces about this. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. I just want to read a couple of paragraphs out of this article to kind of give you a flavor of what Pastor Ovedall has to say. So he says this, quote, "I've been talking about this situation." He's talking about the Romanizing of the United States. "This situation for years on my Heart of the Matter program because of the social, political, and most importantly, spiritual effects that the alien invasion is having on America. It is unfortunate that very few people have been concerned with the religious aspect of this issue." Ding, 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 ding. Yes, Pastor Ovel, that's absolutely right. Very few people have been concerned with the religious aspect of this issue. Over the past few years, I've spent some time pointing out that the Roman Catholic Church is aiding and abetting the criminal invasion of America from Mexico because the illegals are almost all Roman Catholics. And of course, this ties in, we just talked those quotes from Steve Bannon. He's talking about, yeah, they want to flood the country with immigrants because they're Roman Catholics and need them to fill the pews and, and therefore, increase their, the clout of the Roman Catholic Church in the United States. So yeah, he's talking about this, and this article was written back in 2006, but it's still very timely. It's still excellent. I'm going to put a link to this in the show, and if you've never read this article, I recommend you read it. And if you've read it, go back and reread it because this is really good stuff. And so let's see here. Over the past few years, I've spent time pointing out that the Roman Catholic Church is aiding and abetting the criminal invasion of America from Mexico because the illegals are almost all Roman Catholics. That church state which maintains political, diplomatic relations with the UN, the EU, the Russian Federation, the Organization of the Liberation of Palestine, and 174 nations around the globe is working both legally and criminally on behalf of a movement, the goal of which is to bring as many Mexicans into America as possible so as to eventually take over a large chunk of our nation. This multifaceted movement made up of radical organizations such as La Raza, the race, Atzlan, and Micha is called Reconquista. Roll my R's there. Reconquista, which is just reconquest. And he goes on here and he explains how all of this works. And there's one particular quote in here I remember. Let's see if I can find it here. Oh yeah, here we go. This is a quote from I'll just read the paragraph here. So he's citing some examples of the kind of thinking that exists within the Roman Catholic Church about immigration to the United States from Mexico and from other countries in Central America. So, quote, "Of course, the Catholic bishops are the generals in the offensive against America's sovereignty, security, and Protestant identity. The thousands upon thousands of diocesan and religious order priests that are the frontline troops who are charged with turning rhetoric into reality. As might be expected, the priests tend to be even blunter than the bishops with regard to the Catholic Church's human rights work on behalf of illegal Mexican immigrants. For instance, consider this from priest Paul Marks, as quoted in the well-respected Catholic paper The Wanderer, May 6, 1987. Quote, "America is a dying nation. I tell the Mexicans when I'm down in Mexico to keep on having children and then take back what we took from them, California, Texas, Arizona, and then to take the rest of the country as well." End quote. So, in fact, let me go on here. I'm going to read a little bit more of this here. This is such good stuff. And this is Ovidal. He's continuing. He says, quote, "As is plain from that quote, the Vatican's corrupt campaign to funnel illegal evangelizers into America did not start in 2003, but it is increasingly out in the open, more aggressive and more anti-American. For instance, the 2003 pastoral letter of the Mexican and American bishops openly declares the xenophobic and racist attitudes of those Americans who are demanding an end to the alien invasion from Mexico. They are also outraged that our Border Patrol would actually arrest individuals criminally crossing our borders. Alarmingly, migrants are often treated as criminals. The bishops echo the shrill charges of the leftist Reconquista crowd when they speak of reports of physical abuse of migrants by U.S. Border Patrol agents and claim that the U.S. record of handling undocumented, unaccompanied minors from Mexico and other countries is shameful." So I'll stop myself there at this point. I think you sort of get a flavor of this article. And of course, and this is even back in 2006, so these bishops, these priests and what have you, they get out there and they encourage and they push this massive flood of illegal immigration in the United States. And then when somebody says, there's a little bit of problem with that, this stuff shouldn't be happening. And they say, how you have to be a white supremacist. You have to be a racist to take that stance. And so, the outcomes of shaming language. And so, you can import all of these people to the benefit of the Roman Catholic Church and all the socialists and the Democrats and all this other stuff. But if anybody says anything about it, well, then you can shame them into silence by calling them a racist. I guess that's great work if you can get it. It's about time the American people developed a backbone. We need to develop a back. We need, there's that verse, I think it's what is in Proverbs somewhere. It talks about, that the wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. And I think part of the problem, I think the problem here with the American people. I'm talking here specifically to my fellow Protestants. Is that and I wrote about this some last week in my blog post, and that is that our unbelief is coming back to burn us. I mean, we have I think John Robbins mentioned or paraphrased or quoted R.L. Dabney from the 19th century when he said, R.L. Dabney remarked, way back in the 1800s that Protestantism was in real trouble. And, we've gotten to a point here in the last 100 years since the progressive era, what have you. I mean, Protestants have turned their back on the Lord. We have abandoned the faith. We no longer believe that the scripture is the inerrant, infallible word of God. We no longer believe that justification is by faith in Christ alone. We've abandoned these doctrines. We've gone on, we've turned everyone to his own way, as the prophet Isaiah said, and we're paying the price for it. And now when all somebody has to do is just say the word racist, and everybody goes and turns and flees. We run away. We don't have any moral courage. We can't stand up and say, no, the American people have legitimate interests in putting a stop to this kind of thing. It's not racist to highlight the fact that the current immigration policies of the current presidential administration are going to seriously damage the American people. And it's okay to point that out. The American people have legitimate interests. The American people are not here to provide welfare to the world. That's not why we're here. And anybody who suggests that, whether it's the Pope or the USCCB or some politician or academic, they are promoting really treasonous ideas, and they need to be refuted, and their proposals need to be stopped politically. And it's really high time, as I said, that as the American people, we need to get a backbone. And I say this especially to my fellow Protestants. We need to get a backbone, and we need to learn how to stand up and rebuke these people from the Word of God. So anyway, that's all I had to say here for this week. I had so much more I wanted to talk about here, but I got into this immigration mode. I thought, no, I'm just going to stay focused on this one topic. And anyway, I think that's quite enough for this week. So I wanted to just say thanks for listening. I really do appreciate that. I really enjoy doing these podcasts and doing these live streams. It's a lot of fun, and I hope that Lord willing that you learned something from this, and it was a blessing to you. And if you do, subscribe to my my blog feed, subscribe to my YouTube feed, give me a like, give me a thumbs up there. I'd appreciate that. And I will see you next time. So until we talk again next week, may the God of truth guide you in all truth as you read and study his word. Good night, everybody.